Okay, Ludmil, you had a question. We could maybe shift to your questions.
Yes, I do, but I can start as soon as we are done with Fukushima, if that's all.
Well, if there are no more questions about Fukushima, we can go on.
Okay, so I can start with my questions. It's going to be a sort of long conversation. You can blame my social education, but I studied like 50 years ago.
Make it short and go on.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you questions. Don't accept it as testing or something else. I just want to completely understand what we are trying to do. And I'm going to start with creating the nanomaterials. So there is even a post in the Keshe Foundation forum, and half of the steps are wrong. So I would like to clear this completely before we can go further down to create the Gans state and stuff like that. Okay. So my first question is, starting from the beginning, you add KOH or NaOH into a plastic container.
Yes, that's it.
Mr. Keshe once says he is covering the KOH with plastic mesh. Is that still standing or not?
Yes, well, there are two steps. The first step is, in fact, to have mostly you will put caustic soda and eventually a little bit of potash or whatever you have containing potassium. You could add eventually pieces of aluminium also, and yes, and yes, okay. So you have a stuff which is put in the plastic container, and the mesh is in fact to separate the material you want to nanocoat from being clogged with pieces of sodium hydroxide or potassium, whatever you have there. It's the mesh, plastic mesh, is just to have a separation between the material that you want to coat and the caustic soda and whatever you have used for the condition to be created. It's just to lift it a little bit. It's just to create a kind of gap between the bottom of for the sediments to be in the plastic container, separated from the material you want to coat.
Okay, that answers to one question. The other question is, when do you use KOH? When do you use NaOH? I have access to ammonium OH, magnesium OH, lithium OH. So is it any rule of the thumb regarding the materials and the different OHs, or how that works?
You have different conditions being built up, but mainly KOH brings a potassium which contains a certain amount of potassium 40, and potassium 40 is a beta releaser, and that condition helps the build-up of the nanomaterial on the surface of the wires or whatever you use to be coated. So mainly what is used here is sodium hydroxide, and a little bit of potassium is added to help in the development of the nanomaterial. Yes, and this depends on the salt. Well, what we are doing all depends on the salt we are creating, and hope it still goes on.
Yeah, Dave is trying to get in.
Okay. So we have it's calling the group. Okay. So what's important to see is that the salt, the sodium hydroxide containing sodium is the type of salt that we are looking to have, and that will be used further afterwards when we make the cells. We still use sodium salt, which is the sea salt is mainly sodium chloride, and you are in the same kind of material because it's also sodium. So that's why it's mainly sodium hydroxide that is used, but potassium hydroxide is added for help in the nano coating of the material.
I see some people add Coca-Cola next. Is that one of the conditions?
The Coca-Cola next is to release some hydrogen monoatomic, and it's also to help the production of the nanomaterial being on the surface of the material you want to coat.
So if we want, we can add them and no harm them, right? Well, if we have them, we can add them there.
What you achieve when you add different materials to your what do you call it, the original coating, is that in the future, when we have more detailed breakdown of the layers, is that all your materials, which you, let's say if you use copper wire, the way it's done here most of the time, what you get is the ganses of copper, layer by layer, overlaying each other. As one layer is produced, the other layer pushes the bottom skin up and allows the production, or through the gaps you allow the copper oxide. In introducing the plastic from Coca-Cola bottle or aluminum, you create the same nano layer of hydrogen in between the gaps. So when you put composite material in your caustic, somewhere in your layers, those materials become part of, it becomes composite nano layer. And in some cases when you do this, you'll find a multicolor mixture when you produce your GANs. In case of introducing plastic from the Coca-Cola bottle, it's to produce not a homogeneous but a composite layers. So these composite layers, you only see them if you produce enough of them when you convert your nano layers into a GANs state. So if you have put bits of plastic in your caustic, you might have, let's say, 10,000 layers of copper, 2 or 3 layers of hydrogen nano, and then if you put aluminum, you get maybe 10 layers of aluminum, and then you get copper. But because you don't have the facility to measure, you see mainly the copper GANs state when you convert it. But in fact, this is part of the process that we use for composite GANs materials. This is the next step to understand. But at the moment, as far as you're concerned, you just make copper oxide or copper nano layers, which leads to copper oxide on the top layers when it's converted. So you can add any material you like, and you make a sandwich. And if you do enough of it, enough layering of it, where you allow the porosity of the nano layer to be held, you will find out you can make composite nano layers. We've done it here, and you will see the change. They don't mix. This is the reason we put things in, but that was to be discussed later on. It's something we are aware of. But if you put too much plastic in from the bottle, and you produce a nano hydrogen layer in your sandwich, then you'll find out your penetration, the system stops much faster, because the size of the nano hydrogen gap is, let's say, it is 10 to minus 9, and then you have a copper on the top and a copper underneath, so the filtration stops. This is a technology we developed. It's been tested especially for dialysis system. So at the moment you try to understand about the layers, and then we speak about the composite layers in the next few months when everybody understands what's going on. I'll pass on to John.
So isn't making just stupid suggestions some sense if we want to produce these layers, let's say to leave the material for 12 hours, after that add, let's say, Coca-Cola bottle caps and have them for another 12 hours. In that way we can have the layers separated and in order, I guess. Or I'm wrong?
Well, that's the way, because when you want to nano coat, the material in which your material, the way the nano coating is done depends on the environment. So if you change the environment, the nano coating will modify in consequence. So the size of the container, the position of the container near a wall, or well, the container itself is plastic. It's another kind of plastic because it has to be sufficiently inert in some ways, but cola next is in fact transformed because it's another kind of plastic. So you have to choose your plastics in such a way that the container won't react too much. So yes, the change of material and condition will change the coating made.
Okay, going back to the KOH and NaOH, I think finally we got down to 5 grams per liter or less than that. Is it any measurement we can use roughly, or?
Well, we have no measurement, but in fact, in French we say au pifomètre. In fact, it's we just put a layer, thin layer, in the bottom of the container, the plastic container, just to spread out the NaOH and put a little bit of KOH. I would say it doesn't go over the 10% of KOH for the quantity of NaOH. It's just a little, and that's why we have layering of the nanomaterial that will give us a spectrum of of fields in the nanomaterial.
Okay. So after that we add boiling water.
Yeah.
Boiling water gets the temperature to some extent of the entire container. If we put it in a water bath, let's say for example, we can keep that temperature for unlimited time. Does that make any sense or not?
No, it's not necessary. What is important is the initial condition, and that's why, in fact, if you put some boiling water, by adding that to the caustic, you just increase the temperature at that moment, because when the caustic will dissolve in water, it will increase. That's why when you pour the water, even if the boiling has just stopped, you see the water boiling again when you pour it. That's because the increase of temperature produced by the dissolving of the caustic soda or the potash will allow a new boiling of the water. It's a local increase in temperature made by the mixing of the material. That's why you don't use caustic soda in the liquid form. You'd use it as a crystalline form.
Okay, but my idea is, do we need continuous temperature for the entire process?
No, it's
Because at
just
the
the
beginning we can use the existing temperature, and after that we can put it in a water bath, let's say, for example,
No, it's
and
not
keep the
necessary.
temperature up.
You
It's not a problem.
No, what's important is to close the lid and to keep the environment, and that environment has to be left, and it will continue for a certain amount of time. But it's the initial temperature and increase of temperature when you pour the water on your caustic soda that give the condition, and the condition has to be maintained by the cap that you'll put on your plastic container.
Okay.
In some ways, I've tried to use my extraction of caustic material produced by the ashes, and have reached with a stainless steel coating completely black, but this has to be tested further to see if it's really the nanomaterial we need, but it becomes a black, very dark black powder on the surface. Yes.
There is a addition a little bit, because we explained this yesterday in the lab. Whatever nanomaterial you make, it will be black. Doesn't matter what you make. Use caustic, use different kind of salt, any OH combination you use. The end product, if you made a very, very good material, doesn't matter if it's copper, whatever, and you made good enough thick layers, you should get a black color. On gold, we have never seen black, but we produce that. In silver, sometimes we have seen spots of black, but not full black. But if you have a real perfect nanomaterial, doesn't matter what you make, it should be black in color. Reason being is that nano layers, they are made of solid, cavity, solid, cavity. It's positive, what do you call it, p-n junction. It is capacitor, it's solid container to hold the capacitor. the capacitance in the middle. So what in fact it is, the gap, the center of the gap, and the reason you get a gap and you get the material on either side is that the matter in the Gans state, or in the nano state I should say first, is gravitational magnetic field layer of itself. The gap between the two, or what you call p-n junction, between the two matter, is where the two atoms of, let's say, carbon find their distance. It's a separation between two similar gravitational magnetic fields of, let's say, carbon, that creates the gap. This is what we call the maggrav of one atom finds balance in its position in respect to maggrav of another atom of carbon. So to find the position between, it's like the Earth and the Sun. Where they find a gap, the balance, they find a gap. But because the both atoms are of the same gravitational magnetic field, you see homogeneous gaps and matter, gaps and matter. So you have to understand the structure. So in Gans, in a nano layers, why you find equal gaps and equal material is because the gravitational magnetic field of the similar element is just about the same. And when you put two plasma next to each other, they don't get stuck to each other in the opposite way, but they find a gap that they can accommodate each other. So you create that gap. That's why nanomaterials are p-n junction look. Now, the other thing you have to realize is that, okay, now the next layer up, you have another atom of carbon. Now you have another vertical p-n junction, another nano layer composition in respect to the layer up. So when you have gaps and magnetic field, gravitational field separation, layer on layer, not only, let's say, the 10th layer interacts with the 11th layer, but the 10th layer interacts, is filled with the 20th layer on the copper wire. The strength between the first, or the 10th and the 20th, is different than the one between 10th and the 11th. So what you in fact produce on nano layers is a spectrum of gravitational magnetic fields. And as you know, why a material is dark, black? Because of the absorption of all the lights, all the frequencies, all the spectrum of the magnetic fields. So if you have created a perfect thick nano layer, and you understand the concept of the physics and interaction of the gravitational magnetic field which you produce between each layer, you absorb through gravitational field of layers interaction and a spectrum of the light. So your nano layers, doesn't matter what you produce, if it's good enough, has to be black. The blackness shows the perfection of the nano layers and the layers which are on gravitational magnetic fields. This is very much, if it's hard to understand, it's like the layers on the ring of Saturn's. Ring of Saturn's blackness is in layers in so many ways. It's a balanced magnetic fields which absorbs, we see it. But you see the same thing in the structure of the plasma in the solar systems in their star. Now, what happens, a lot of you, I know you did a test last Saturday, for example, in Canada, I think. When you take Vince, I think it's done that, yeah. So, because I thought it was done in Belgium. So what happens is that when you let your nanomaterial dry to stabilize its condition, because if you keep it in liquid, they still can slip. And you'll find out, oh, I had a coating and now suddenly disappeared. Because you did not create a stabilized condition that all the fields are linked to each other. This is why we let you hang your wires or films or whatever for 24 hours. for the establishment of the gravitational magnetic field balance between each layer. There's no other reason for it. This is why we tell you the minute you take it out, put a voltmeter on it. That establishes a faster connection between layers, stabilizing each line is layer to each other. Now what do? You take this film or the copper wire which you have coated and you put it back in the salt solution. And then you see that you get green materials, blue materials, orange materials, white materials, depends whatever it is, getting to the bottom. And if you connect enough of these in the containers, the way you've seen the knowledge seekers are doing in the lab, you'll collect a lot of copper oxide. But if you stay there long enough, after a week or two or whatever, you find out you're still collecting copper oxide, but your dark black material has disappeared. What's the reason? But you have no black material at the bottom of the pot. So what happens now, layer by layer, which was a nano layer on the top, because you created the condition in the salt and back in the same environment as you created it, the top layer finds a gravitational magnetic field within the H2O of the water, a condition to release its field and become separated from the created nano layer. So what you get now, a flat condition to a spherical condition. Now, in the way of trying to become the spherical shape of itself, the material, because it has found balance in nano condition, because of the gap and spaces it created with the different layers on different length, now you have a balanced sphere. And this balanced sphere is still copper. But what has happened, it rotates to become a ball of the copper. It becomes a sphere of the copper atom in its own entirety of the atomic structure. Now you get color of copper plus the oxygen which was part of the bond, which is in the water, or the hydrogen, and you get copper oxide. So you start creating copper oxide, you lose your top layer, you find out the next layer goes the same way, till you get to a point that the gravitational magnetic field of the copper itself can hold on to a very few nano layers above it. And this is the point you'll find out very fine, I've shown this to the knowledge seekers, talky kind of copper oxide. And the gap between it allows the separation and the, conversion of the atoms into nano, and from nano into mixing with the water to a copper oxide. So, in fact, what you do in the whole process, you put your material in the, caustic. You heat it up. In heating up, you allow the loosening of the top layer. And these top layers, because you keep the environment the same, build up very fast. So now you're changing a molecular structure into atomic structure. This is the reason you do the caustic. Then you let it hang and you allow it to stabilize. Then you can leave the wire for centuries, or you can use the wire tomorrow morning. When you put it back in the environment of where it came from, which was the sodium, that's why you put it back in the salt, which is called the sodium. You allow the same environment which you have created for the separation back into atomic structure. So you go from flatliner to atomic spherical balance, which is the Gans. You got to understand the process. And this is what a lot of people never understood. Can we do this? Can we do that? You can do anything you like. This is how your body is made. You have a red tissue, you have the skin on it. Where do you think the skin came from? Somebody doesn't go and put the skin on the muscle. Because of the gravitational magnetic field of what the fiber amino acid is, so the body at that point uses a different salt combination to make the cover of the muscle. Then it uses it because of its combination and the gap Does not allow blood to go through, but it allows the lymph to slip in beside. So you got to understand what you do, how you do it, and like just not just bunch of monkeys mix things and then say it did that, it didn't do that. Why do you do it? This is not as His Eminence Ayatollah Khamenei said in one of his speeches, should not become a photocopying office. He said Iran should not becoming a photocopying book for other nations' scientists, but other nations have to become photocopying for what the Iranians produce. This mentality has to go across all of us. It's not just a photocopying machine that, oh, they did this, so we did. Understand what you're doing. Understand the reason layers are created. Understand what is the consequences of it. Understand what you want at the end of it. How much carbon you want, how much would hydrogen attach itself to copper, in what combination would attach to a nanolayer that it becomes a Gans later on. What do you need the Gans of the hydrogen in which level? Observe the first layers when you clean up the bottom of the pot, and then later on. The coarse is not very fine, because you don't have a copper oxide on its own, you have other attachments or molecules. So is this question of why you do this, why you do that, it means you have never understood, you just want to be a photocopying machine. That's why the Keshe Foundation and knowledge seekers are not here to become your photocopying machine. This has to stop. Understand. You don't understand. None of you ask what is the structure of it, why and how. This has to change. Because if you understood how one atom, one atomic layer, in respect to another atomic layer stands, if you look at the next layer, the carbon should be somewhere in the middle between the other 2 or 3 carbons underneath, not straight away on the top. In the next few days, when we're just getting ready, you will see, I explained yesterday to the knowledge seekers in the lab, we are setting up the space reactors in the star configuration. You see the same repeat, because we understood the whole concept. You'll find the mother reactor. If you look at the design of the reactor in the design of the spaceship which we released, you just looked at it, oh, this is what's going on. Look at the position of the 3 reactors at the bottom. Look at the reactor number 1, the mother reactor in the center. It's set in the same position combination as nano layers, but in 2 layers. The mother sits up, same distance gap between the 320 degrees away and the same distance down. So because we do this, it allows us to create gravitational magnetic fields in any direction as we desire. We have repeated the technology of a nano layer into a Gans state as a nano layer in the space technology for the lift. Understand the totality of it. Now look at the structure of your amino acid. Oxygen sits on top. Oxygen star, I keep on telling in my talks before. Then the nitrogen, hydrogen, and carbon play very similar position as the star formation. This double bond, single bond is all load of rubbish because they never understood. It's magnetic gravitational positioning. Even I hope the knowledge seekers will show you the system which I built especially to produce protein. I showed them yesterday. You see 2 gaps which are oxidized, 1 gap clear, 1 gap going. And you find the clear gap is the oxygen in the center, 2, 1, 1. And then because I set up to create the soul, you find 1 and then you find a oxidization. This is exactly how the brain is. You have the emotional, you have the gap, you have the physical, you have the gap, and you have what you call the soul. And nobody understands the connection. Just don't become monkeys. Try to understand. And we try to explain more and more. How do we accomplish it? Does it matter? I want to do. What do you want? Do you want I made one system and I knew I'm going to make amino acid. And you see it, doesn't matter if it's oxidized by water or it's oxidized by steel or whatever, you still get the same combination. Because the target was not only to produce a very, very perfect protein, but it was set, the system which I made, was set to produce very, very little voltage and current. I always say you don't see megawatt, kilowatts in the body of the man, but it survives and it works because it works on nano, micron voltage and amperage. And in my system, I've done it, and in their system, the knowledge seekers have done the same. So don't come back and say you add caustic. It means you have understood nothing but you're doing it. Just a bunch of, what do you call it, monkey see, monkey do. Understand the totality. The reason is done. Why you're doing it. Why do we put in the salt? The next step, we use the same nanomaterial which comes out of the pockets to produce the brain structure which is on the table now. Because your body, your brain is made of Gans state of matter. Now we're producing the first zero, what do you call it, without any wire communication, exactly like a brain, and it sits here on the table. So please, just don't go, why you do this, can you do that? Understand what you're doing, and then understand the concept, the principle. Then once you understand, you can do whatever you like. I'll give the phone back to John.
That's what I'm at least trying to do, to understand it. Another question, you said, let's say soldering the wires is big no-no. Is that because it's contaminating the OH or some other reasons behind?
You cannot solder because...
it means he hasn't understood what I just said. Ludmil, it means you haven't understood a single thing I said. When you have the reason you cannot solder or weld nanomaterials when they are coated is because when a material is in its balance condition, which is in its nano layer, especially on the top layer, it does not accept anything. It's in balance. A material accepts something when its gravitational differential is within itself is different. You create a balance gravitational magnetic field within the atom of the copper. So it does not need to repel and it does not need to absorb, and it stays balanced. The only way you can add something to it is by force to tighten it up to it, which is twisting it, something on top of it. So that is why nano layers behave like diamonds. They behave like Teflon. Nothing can stick on them because they have a gravitational magnetic field balance. When you are in balance, you don't accept and you don't reject. So in adding or soldering or something, you have to create an environment that you can get into, at least to be hang on to something. Huh? When you have soap on your hand, you cannot climb up a rope. Yeah? So, because there is no room for it to be done. It's the same thing. The reason nanomaterials cannot... Yes.
Sorry. I think, I'm not sure, but I think Ludmil was trying to ask if we put solder inside a caustic solution, obviously we're going to be adding different materials.
No, it doesn't make any difference because you can put gold in there. The layers are in the nano layers, which means they're in balance. They're in magnetic gravitational field balance. And in so many ways, if you look, this was done by the people in the Diamond Bourse in Antwerp for me years ago. If you look at the very, very outer layer of the, what do you call it, of the nano material, you don't see a flat. You see very much like a half bulged up, which means you sit on top of a mountain. There are no, and it's just because of the atmospheric gravitational field outside. There's a slight bulge, but it's very much flat. So you don't have that. You don't have anywhere to grip on, and you cannot add some. You can add as many materials you like. I use even the solder. You have a diamond of the solder with a matter of solder. Whatever is the composition.
Could you not melt that solder away?
No. We tried everything. You tried. We tried. Because you have to understand the physical structure.
Yeah.
Yeah? Dogs with dogs. You can't get a dog and a bird to mate, can you? It's the same thing. They're two different things and they don't match.
I wouldn't want to try.
No, you never know. In the future we will.
So any other material...
We might try. It'll be a nice flying dog.
So any other material besides, let's say, if we deal with copper, any other material besides copper
any material
is gonna demolish the connection of the magnetic.
There is no polish. You still haven't understood it, Ludmil. There is no polish. It's a magnetic gravitational field balance.
No, demolish. I mean, demolish is gonna destroy the magnetic gravitational connection. No. If you don't have a layer, you can't destroy a nano layer. Yesterday, we received the core for Marco. It's the first silver-coated system we are going to try. Should be ready hopefully next couple of days. We silver-coated, particularly nano-coated silver about 3 years ago. And it can be done, but it's a very, very thin layer, extremely thin layer. That's because of the structure, atomic structure of the silver itself. You don't see it. We have not seen it going black. We shown the picture of it 4 or 5 years ago on the Keshe technology website. The same thing happens with gold. You can touch the first few layers, and then due to the gravitational magnetic field of it, it blocks the rest to be done. Mainly to do, I think, with the environment, which is done. If you do it in a total gold environment, might be different. We never had access to test it. So if you put a voltmeter on it, you will see your, what do you call it, the ohmmeter will show insulation total. Which shows there's a nano layer, because that's a characteristic of nano layers. The current flows along, not across. You see your material becoming, what do you call it, resistant, not a conductor, but an insulator. But that insulation layer is very, very thin, extremely thin. So you have to watch when you handle it. And at the same time, you learn by experience. And you mix materials. You can leave your material for 12 hours and put something else in 12 hours on it, but understand how gravitational magnetic field of the layers interact and what you can do next. There are ways to do things. We've done things before. And it's very interesting when you do composite matter, nano layer, Gans. And you will see that very soon. That's when we understand the nano layer production. Then we do the composite materials. It's a fantastic business. The people who are worried about the computer world, they'll be shaking when they know how they can do it, and it's worth nothing to do. Because each gap within the nano layer is a magnetic field gap, and it has a spectrum. You can put all the information of the present computers in one of those gaps if you understand what to do. But in time, we open the window. At the moment, you got to understand what nanomaterials are and how you can work with it.
Because don't forget, the gap in between the layers, as much as is separation, is the center itself of energy of gravitational magnetic field too. Because to keep that separation, the matters part, which is the atoms of, let's say, carbon, have to continuously release their fields to keep their presence, balanced presence. And where do these fields go when you have a gap? So these gaps are the center of energy and information if you know how to play with it. But in time we explain. John?
Okay, so
the question.
yeah, and there are lots of questions, and more coming up, by the way.
Is there somebody else wanting to ask a question also?
Yeah, actually, I just had a quick question. When we were talking before, I had told you that I was using a salt solution, and I made that salt solution 50%, and I still see that I'm, for what I can see, I'm gathering materials, which could be copper oxide, and so does. On my next experiment, I'm going to try with 10 times less the concentration, so 5% solution, and see the difference. I think of it as like tuning the system to where it would pick it up. Is that right?
Look at the texture of what you.
Material and look at the current flow. The voltage and current flow between your cups if you're using different cups.
Sorry, yeah, I can't hear you.
Look, when you change the composition or when you change the dilution percentage, look at there are a few things to look at. Look at the what do you call it? The structure of the Gans. If you produce enough of it, keep it in the box and look at how the magnetic gravitational field balance comes in. And then try to measure the voltage and the current according to the dilution. And then, while you're doing that, keep an eye, don't look at the bottom, see what you've collected. Look on the top, see what structure the fat you're producing is looks like, feels like, behaves like. Because if you have managed to do a copper oxide, if you manage to make a CO2, due to the situation which you create inside at a very, very low current flow of plasma, you have to understand that the energy you release in these sets is not electron plasma. Is that magnetic field between the atoms which you're releasing, which is MAGRAV. So that MAGRAV can lead to creation, especially in a water condition, and especially try to add some nitrogen, fertilizer to your thing. You see if the speed production of the nitrogen goes high enough to create and give you a different kind of fat on the top. Look at the layer on the top. We are sending these layers for examination this week for energy combination.
Mr. Keshe, you're talking about the grease-looking thing on top.
Yeah, that is fat. That's a natural fat. If you put a finger on it, don't do it till we give you full detail, and put it on your mouth. First of all, you feel like a very massive burn for a few hours because you receive too much energy. It's like you're getting hit by, let's say, by a torch. But because it's plasmatic, it gets absorbed by your body, and you'll find out you lose your appetite for a bit. The reason you lose your appetite is not the side effect, it is because you receive direct plasmatic Gans state energy the way your body is made of. The tinkling and the feeling is just that the body is trying to absorb it. It's the way your food goes through your lymph system. So if that greasy thing is what I call the cow machine. This is the source of life. If you make different composition of salts, as we've done in the lab, and I showed it to the knowledge seekers yesterday, you get a fat one, which is the less salt you add, you go towards the sweet water, goes towards the protein, which is to do with the wheat and vegetables. The more salt you add, you look at the structure. If you set it up the right way, you get a thicker fat on the top. This is the animal fat. So if you have 3 or 4 different things on your table of combination of the salt, you can mix it together too. Then you eat and you can consume all the energy you need in the spectrum of the fat in all protein, like a bread, a meat and vegetable protein. And you just need to put your finger on it and you just taste it. And that gives you enough energy for just about 2 or 3 days every time you touch it on your mouth. Because it's made of the structure of your own body in a Gans state, your body absorbs it straight away. If you have by mistake while you're working with your water touched it and put it around your mouth, you know exactly what I'm talking. Yukoko had it, I had it. It feels very much like a burn.
Careful.
Pardon?
I've been very careful.
Yes, but in a way, these are the feeding systems of the future. But we have to understand how much energy you receive, because that's one of the things we ask the laboratories to do, to tell us how much the energy content of these materials. So you got to understand the process. What you have in front of you, we started with a nano layer. You will understand more and more what it means. These systems, if you would have come out from the beginning, says this is the fat, this is your food, the what do you call it, agriculture people would have gone up the creep. But now you see it, you just said it. You see that grease. And as you said, you change the composition. This is why we find animals like red blood or whatever as being on the land. And with the different protein, you see the flesh of this fish in the water, which has got a different dilution. And again, you see wheat. If this is a good example in Fukushima. The water contamination, which has come from the sea, has contaminated the land with the salt. And nothing can be grown. Because exactly what you said. The salt combination has changed. Protein for wheat and rice is a weaker mixture. If you could wash the land with the rain and take its salt content out, the land become in a condition, environmental condition, that they can produce wheat again. This is what these Gans materials would allow the land to do. The salt contamination, if they know what to do, they can use it to produce Gans of the matter, which will allow in its shielding wheat to be grown in the middle of the sea. Cannot do. Because they haven't understood the concept, they haven't understood the principle. So you dilute 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Observe the fat which you produce on the top. And if you can get them analyzed, you see in the weakest, the lightest, you have the protein, the fat layer, the grease of what protein is in the wheat. And in the higher composition, you see the fat protein of the man, or the animals, or flesh. This is what we try to explain. This is what's coming out in the paper I've written. It's going to be published with, hopefully when Marco and Yukako will finish it the next few days. I have explained that in the paper. In fact, in Africa, a child should not go hungry anymore with what is on the table. You touch, you take that grease, and it's so rich, it's so full of balanced energy the way your body is made. You receive the energy, you live a normal life. This is how life will be fed in the space. We won't give you apples and oranges. We won't give you meat. Partial part of the digestion will be supplied in this way. This is what I kept on telling you, nobody understood. We changed what color would you like the CO2 to be, because in your head you understand it that way. But in fact, the energy is in a Gans state, is in the exact copy of your own body, and absorption is very easy. You can feed, I call them milking cows. These are protein cows, which it doesn't need a cow to do, because now we understand the process of the creation. This is what I said next week. We announce something which is going to shock a lot of people, and the Vatican will run for it and the rest behind it. The whole process is the man dependence on the cycle of this planet through this system is completed. So you can have your energy, if you can produce enough of it, and now, as you say, you see that layer of grease on top. That is a pure, is part of your structure of your own body. The food is there, the energy is there, and the warmth you can use if you know what to do with it. So the circle is getting completed, but the beauty of it is people like you are testing and showing and saying, this is what I see. But now we talk what do you call it, a baby, then baby language, and a doctor in the doctor language about the same thing. Bird and the bees. So now you start doing it, and hundreds of thousands of people are doing it. Now you have to understand what you're doing and what you're producing. This is the ultimate feed machine. The only thing is you need what protein you need, what material you need for it, is how you dilute it. This is how life created. Nobody came and brought a seed of rice and put it there and says that's protein. Because of his salt contamination in wherever it started, and the dilution of it, it became wheat. If you put it enough over a long period, the next, let's say 3 or 4 months, if you know what you do, you can create rice protein which has the same fat content condition in the salt level as a cow protein. Now you understand it. This throws the whole genetic into the commotion of not being back to zero again. You try, you change the dilution, but watch what current flow of plasma you get. How much your light enlightens.
About current?
Yes,
so,
there's a current flow of plasma, not the current as electron current, huh?
Right, so that also says that the more cells that you have, that the current will be distributed in the lower amount to each individual cell. Is that
yes, but
accurate?
you see, because let me explain something, Vince. The knowledge seekers realized that in the second test here. When they start adding more cells into the boxes, the energy went down, and they was puzzled. Yeah, how can this be? Because logically, in the matter level, when you add more cells, you get more current and the voltage. Yeah, but here it doesn't happen because the plasma have to find a balance.
So the current or the voltage going down would would also mean the voltage will go down for each individual cell.
Yes, the current in this system is a plasmatic current flow, which means gravitational magnetic. When there is no balance, it goes the other way till it gets fed. You take from your environment what you need. I think somebody will post.
And the feeding is all depending on the layers that you create.
Pardon?
The feeding, I would say, would be the layers that you create on your coated wires. Or
in a way, yes, but what's going to happen if you run your systems long enough and you're patient enough? You will find that very soon, in times to come, that there are no materials left in your buckets to change, to convert. Because what you've done, you converted all the copper matter into a copper nano, and from copper nano into copper GANs, or CO2 GANs, or CuO GANs, or CO2 GANs. And you collect it from the bottom.